Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on how to connect with buyers in 2024. I'm Nicola, recently described as a vintage tech marketeer. I'm not sure how much I like that, but there is nothing I like better than a good SaaS Insights report. Until I came across a somewhat horrific stat that only 6% of go-to-market teams believe that their messages communicate unique insights as to how they solve the customer's problems. Well, this caused a wee bit of reflection about my own messaging and marketing in the past few companies. And I thought rather than noodling on this and going down some sort of rabbit hole, I'd instead bring three experts in this space together to help us all improve on this percentage in 2025, because the same report is going to be run in 12 months' time, and I do not want to be seeing 6% again. I'm wanting at least over 50, please. So we're going to be discussing this topic for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. But before we meet our three experts, I have a request for all of you. First of all, for those that haven't yet, please do introduce yourself in chat. And then I would love you to rate yourself and your go-to-market team from 1 to 5 on how well you think your team connects with buyers. 5 is you're nailing it, you're part of that 6%. And 1 being, yeah, we're pretty disastrous and I have a lot to learn today. So just scoring out of 5 in chat. Obviously, all our panelists are straight up 5s. So now over to our panelists. Would you each do a quick intro before we get started? Zach, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Nicola, and welcome everybody. Yeah, I look forward to diving into a pretty intriguing topic here. So I've been studying the art and science of sales, is one way to look at it, for about the last 20 years, working with companies like CEB, which became part of Gartner, and the company Challenger that we built, and now with working as a chapter head with Pavilion and as founder of Insight Revenue. We've been tracking this for a really long time, and so love to hear the different perspectives and talk about how we go from 6% to closer to 60%, hopefully, or more across the time. Thanks.
Thanks, Zach. Flo, tell us about you.
Yeah, so I'm a CMO in the AI industry at the moment for a company called V7. I have always been selling to the kind of data science and analytics persona. I was previously at Carto, which is in the geospatial analytics technology arena, and then also did a stint in telecoms at Telefonica before that. I'm based in London. I like to say that I'm a make money marketer, not a make it pretty marketer. Because I'm one of those marketers that like to spend a lot of time with sales and very much be in the trenches with them. And yeah, based in London, but was previously based in Madrid for quite a while, so not too far from Zach as well. But great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
So Flo, we're seeing we've had some 1 out of 5, some 2s, some 3s. Where would you rate yourself here and V7?
I would probably say a 4, but it feels like it's constantly changing in AI because the industry is moving so quickly. You don't know what OpenAI and Google are going to drop each day that turns everything on its head. So this is an exciting industry to be in, for sure.
But I'm glad we have a 4, because at the moment there is nothing in chat above a 3. Mark, tell us about you.
Hey, thanks, Nicola. So I've been in commercial teams for 17 years now, 15 of those in leadership positions, typically working across both sales and marketing. Probably had a little bit more depth in my earlier career in marketing. Eventbrite in the UK and Ireland really architect their inbound and content marketing playbook, which was really, really successful. We kind of exported that globally. And then lastly in my career, I've been a little bit more on the sales side, but also straddling both sales and marketing as a chief revenue officer, helping take a test from 0 to 5 and doubling Student Beans, which is a business who are more in the tens of millions. So I've had a nice range of experience from very, very early stage startups where actually you're really just trying to figure out what is it this company does and how do we resonate, through to then the slightly more different challenge of how do you actually scale the message and make sure people are all using the same hymn sheet, so to speak.
Mm. And Mark, where would you say you are on a scale of 1 to 5 at the moment with Revved Up?
Oh, Revved Up. So being brutally honest, Yeah, we're very early stage. We are probably a 2 out of 5 right now, but clearly I believe in on our core competencies in mind that the aim is to get it to a 4 out of 5 very, very quickly.
And Joe's just added a really good comment here, having been brutal to himself and given his go-to-market team 1 out of 5, but inside that overabundance of products with very little credibility on how they will reduce risk. So yeah, some interesting views already coming through. Well, Zach, I'd like to start with you because you at Insight Revenue were responsible for putting this report together. How surprised were you at this 6% data point?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So in a little context of the background, so Timur Hisielmaz, who is one of my co-founders of Insight Revenue, was actually the head of research for sales and marketing at CEB, which is now Gartner. So all of the research you see behind the Challenger sale, the Gartner practice today, a lot of those foundational pieces were built by him. So one of the things that we really wanted to study was this issue of cross-functional alignment within teams, and then how well they're aligned with value delivery with their customer and where the hiccups are, where people are struggling and where they're succeeding. And so we actually have seen most companies struggle over the years at implementing great insight. So we expected folks to not be doing that well. But the surprise was here is that we expected some overconfidence, because in the study, there was an interesting data point where the most confidence people had is that they actually believed that their product solved a really important problem for their customer. But on the total other end of the spectrum, we saw that folks actually self-admitted that they felt one of the things they were weakest at was deep customer understanding. And so I think when I look at that data point and I look at those two things, wow, we love our products, we drink the Kool-Aid, we can't really connect those to the customer's world. So then when you look at that 6%, you can tell why people feel like, hey, maybe we're talking, but people aren't responding, they're not resonating, we're not differentiating, we're not getting that connection that we need. And so I think it's a really interesting, almost philosophical conundrum that the companies are facing right now, where they love their products, but they're way too inward focused.
Right. So they're actually focusing on what they believe their product is doing versus in what their customers think their product is doing. So you mentioned that you're a very sales-focused marketeer. So how did you feel about this stat when you saw it?
Yeah, I think one thing that came to mind was the fact that so often people founding technology businesses are technologists, and they don't necessarily come from the vertical to which they're selling the software. And so it's really important balance for founders who are building out their teams to make sure that they get a mixture of technology expertise, but then also the industry specific stuff if they're selling to real estate or they're selling to utilities. And that can be really difficult, because some of the people you want to hire from those verticals to give you that deep customer insight may not be the typical SaaS and technology profiles. So I think often that happens when there isn't enough of that industry insight within the business, and they think they can just get it through customer interactions. And sometimes that's not enough. So yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind when I heard that. But some of the most successful SaaS businesses I see out there are the ones that have managed to hire those key people from industry early.
Really good insight there, actually making sure that your team has those that really understand the industry. They're not just tech bots.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark, you're obviously going through this process at the moment. How surprised were you with that 6%?
Yeah, so I was very surprised. It's really, really low, particularly when you consider a couple of trends, I guess, across the industry over the last number of years. So one is that companies, particularly in the SaaS space, have spent a huge amount of money building out content marketing and thought leadership engines. So for them to have spent all that money and investment, but actually to believe it's cutting through or resonating or producing unique insights is a bit worrying. And then the second piece is that a couple of very popular, let's call them sales movements, one of which was Challenger sale. And then another is, if people are not familiar, there's a guy called Andy Raskin, who's a brand narrative consultant in the US, has become very, very popular over the years. Started with producing a medium post called The Greatest Sales Deck in the World, and then since then has built on this to this idea of building up a strategic narrative. Now, both of those sales movements or approaches to go to market are predicated on having unique insight that you can educate the market on. So if they've become popular, but we're unable to produce those unique insights, something is going wrong, right? So I was quite surprised at the findings, to say the least.
And you're right, so much money and investment is going in, not just like creating content, but also doing all the research around it as well. So just sticking with you, Mark, what do you think is going on? What's the reason behind this? And have you seen this as an issue in any of the companies that you've either worked for or done some advisory and consultancy for?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things there. One is that there's not a strong enough connection to the end user or the end client within a company. So by that, I mean, there's not enough people across the wider business, that's from product to marketing to really anyone that's not core sales or CS, in terms of actually listening to customer calls, right? How many people actually go back and listen to discovery calls? How many listen to client onboarding calls, right? Which means there becomes this disconnect between really understanding the language and the pain points that an organization is solving perspective. And Zach made the point earlier, everyone's quite internally focused, that they don't have the raw material to be very client focused. And then I think the second part of that is a more cultural piece again, which is, if you, and this applies to a lot of businesses that I've worked with, when they think about their onboarding plans for, particularly for sales reps, but also for marketers, they tend to be very heavily focused on our product, right? Here's our product, here's our feature set, here's why we're differentiated from the market, and so on. Very, very little goes into, here's the problem that we're solving, here's the pain point that our clients have. So right from the first day of starting in a new organization, you're telling people to be internally focused, not externally focused. So I think those are two big drivers of where people are getting this wrong.
Florence, as a CMO, do you agree with Mark?
I completely agree. I think I have a lot of founders that come to me, or smaller businesses that I advise and say, hey, I'm looking for someone to lead marketing. You know, I really want someone who actually wants to deeply understand our customers, our product, our partners, etc. The last marketing hire I had just spoke to me in the language of marketing, like, hey, we've got this many visitors, this many MQLs, but they couldn't actually speak the language of the people we're selling to. I've seen so many marketers where you say, okay, do you listen to calls on Gong? And they're like, oh, that's just a tool for sales, right? I don't even have a seat for Gong. And that's shocking, because there's so many amazing use cases for a tool like Gong for marketers, with all of the smart trackers and initiatives boards and all that good stuff. So I think it's a very common thing. And I think when I interview marketers, I probe very hard for that, because it's something that can be, to find that natural curiosity that they want to know the buyer inside out, the product, competitors, differentiators, etc. It's quite unusual to find. And I don't know, that just applies to marketers, right? I'm sure there's plenty of salespeople that are like, okay, I just need to know the product at high level, and then the solutions engineer will bring all the knowledge later in the sales cycle, right? So finding those people can be really difficult. And if those people are leading teams that think that it's just about generating MQLs and not diving into the details on what those leads are and how they might get value from the product, then that's a big problem. But it's such a common pain.
Yeah, and you see it just across leadership teams in general, I find. I think we talk a lot about product market fit, but not enough about language market fit. What is the language that the customers are using? Zach, what's your view on this?
Yeah, so it's interesting, having worked with several hundred companies trying to chip away at this and get it right. And many of those years were with very, very large companies that we would all know very well across different industries when we were working through Challenger or through Gartner. Having worked with smaller companies, well, though, I still see the same problems that you would think are more about, like the pace of movement and the overt complexity of different silos of big organizations. And I think even on a small, I've worked in startups where you have the silos that exist between marketing and sales and product and success, even in a bootstrap startup or a Series A company, right? And so I think it starts with, how are you aligning those teams around not just the journey that you're going on from a product or strategy, like how are we going to make money as a business journey, but actually understanding what is the journey that your customer is going on. And if you can really deeply understand the journey they're going on and the challenges that they're facing, you can then connect that to the journey you want them to go on to work with you. And then ultimately you've got to map those two things together. And that's where kind of the insights meets the messaging. And unfortunately, when you're doing this in silos, which happens most of the time, that point of view doesn't connect to what's really going on in the customer world. And in fact, we run workshops around this. We call Elevate the Conversation, where you take someone from product and marketing and the CEO, and you sit around with a CSM, maybe somebody who's just joined the company and is talking to customers. the title doesn't matter because everyone has a piece of the puzzle. And you start asking, hey, like, what are the things that not the use cases where this deal came to you, but like, what is the strategic problem that company's trying to achieve? How do you hook the use case to that? How do you actually understand sort of what are the problems that person's going to run into when they start trying to drive change? What are their fears? What are those issues that affect them, from a numbers basis or an emotional basis? Then you start to uncover the story of what's really going to motivate them and drive their decision making. When you can do that, you can create insight. But hey, you've got to have a discipline to do it, right? That doesn't just happen from falling out of the sky. And so that's where I think the problem is not having the rigor, the discipline, the cross-functional alignment, and then sort of the framework to be able to go out and do this in a scalable way.
Right, that cross-functional alignment's so key. But I guess this only really works if you actually understand who your customer is. Otherwise, it's never going to align. So coming back to you, Flo, as CMO, how do you make sure that you really are clear on who your ICP is?
Yeah, it's such a common problem. You would think it's not a problem from the outside, right? Like, we know exactly who we sell to. We've got the job titles of our customers, and we know which businesses they operate in, etc. But so many companies are not clear on this. And actually, data is a big point in the beginning. Like, so many times, you jump into the CRM of a business, and they've actually not got all the properties complete to understand the full picture of their ICP. And by that I mean going beyond the predictable things like job title, company size, geography, etc., and actually jumping into other things like what's their phase of funding, or which cloud data warehouse do they use, or whatever it might be relevant to your product, right? But so often that isn't clear, and I think lots of early stage businesses fall into this trap of, well, we've got a few ICPs, and we've got to get to 15 million ARR by the end of the year, whatever the target might be. So really, we could just sell to all those ICPs. And it's like, well, that's the exact opposite of what we're saying with an ideal customer profile. And so you end up all chasing everything, and you're not focused, and that slows down revenue growth, of course. But I think the other challenge with it is if you get diminishing returns if you're not focused on a specific ICP. And as a marketer, it's very difficult if you're going to start pumping in the marketing fuel and it's not focused. It's not a surprise then that you don't get the results that you want from your marketing leader and from your sales team. And I think getting people to be disciplined once ICP is defined is actually the most difficult thing. So, you come out of that meeting and say, this is our ICP, here's the ICP documentation or sales playbook, whatever format you've put it into. And then it's how do you keep people rowing in the same direction? Like when those big leads come in that are from a non-ICP vertical or whatever that might be, how do you get people to say no? Because, we all have our targets. Salespeople have their commissions that they want to get to, and they want to get there, and they don't care if it's outside the ICP in many cases. So it's a genuine challenge, but I think the most successful businesses, it doesn't mean that you can't revisit ICP, and it doesn't mean that ICP doesn't evolve, but you need to try and stick at things for more than a quarter, because if you start doing all these campaigns and every quarter you change your ICP, at least give it 3 or 4 quarters with the same target accounts, if that's your motion, then I think that's the way to go about it. But common challenge.
Really common challenge. There's such a nervousness about going, as Seth Godin calls it, uncomfortably narrow. And you say, give it at least a few quarters. I had a situation where we're laser focused on this ICP 2 weeks in. Well, we thought maybe actually we should broaden it out a little bit. I was like, oh my God, 2 weeks. Mark, any horror stories from your side?
Horror stories. Yeah, I mean, again, I think being clear, even internally on what the definition of an ICP is, it doesn't always get rolled out particularly well. So I was working with one business, and their marketing team were sort of touting all the success that they'd had, and they started naming some of these ICPs that had come through the marketing funnel. And I think, if I remember correctly, it was a huge retailer. It was something like, we've brought Tesco in, and at this point, one of the sales leaders chirped up and said, yes, but it was like the checkout assistant. And so there was this real disconnect between marketing on one hand saying, hey, we've produced this amazing ICP, and then the sales belief that, well, it's the wrong person at the ICP. There's a huge mismatch. And it kind of reminds me of that there's a bit of a meme that you might occasionally see on LinkedIn, etc., which is this that you've got to go under the surface of the obvious firmographics and even to an extent the technographics. So this meme, if I remember correctly, is I'm going to describe 2 people with very similar characteristics, right? Born in 1948, married twice, 2 children, successfully wealthy, spend their winter holidays in the Alps like dogs. And then the meme is one is Prince Charles, or now King Charles, and one is Ozzy Osbourne. Yeah, very, very different characters, but with the same sensible characteristics. So, and that's where businesses get with their ICP, right? They go for the observable characteristics, and they don't go deep enough into the behavioral traits of what makes someone an actual good fit for their problem.
Yeah, so similar to what Flo was just saying there about really getting the depth in there as well. Zach, you were mentioning that you've worked with a whole range of different size companies. Do you see this being a common issue, just like regardless of the size?
Yeah, I think there's the general problem is just it's too generic in most cases. I think that's the thing you see most common everywhere. It's companies, industrial manufacturers from 100 to 10,000 employees, and then off you go, right? And you send some BDRs trying to penetrate the market. But as Mark was saying, what do they actually have in common? And I think the term ideal actually does sometimes set people in the wrong direction, because what they're going to gravitate towards is what's the biggest, best customer we ever had? And let's get 1 million customers just like that, and then we're going to grow the business 100x, right? And a lot of your biggest customers may be anomalies, may have been relationships through your founder if you're a scale up. There may be unique things about them, but they're not scalable opportunities in the market. So it's really interesting. For a long time, we used to look at, we studied high performance in salespeople. And one of the things that and then how you move the middle based on like a high performer signature. And the thing that we'd always tell people is if you look at the number 1 or number 2%, like the top very, very top salespeople in your company, and you try to replicate them, you're going to just destroy your team and depress them. And you're not going to be able to take anything that's scalable from those people. It's really the average of the top 20%, right? And it's interesting. I think the same thought really applies when you look at the growth of your business and how you think of like, what are the commonalities, as Mark was saying, that actually model where our business wants to go, not generally maybe in an early stage company, the business that we used to have, but where we're moving as a business, and let's identify those. We talked to a company recently that analyzes pipelines and then overlays their ICP with the pipeline. And I think they said on average, 80% of the deals in the pipeline didn't fit their ICP. And so I don't know if it's a chicken or an egg. My question was, well, is their ICP wrong? Or because what do you go from there is the question. But generally, I think the message is look, moving forward, when you get insight right, like quality, it's quality over quantity. Otherwise, you're going to have just generic messaging that's not really going to connect with anyone. So you're going to have to really understand your ICPs and your personas to even be able to target and get this right. And most companies, I think, are failing at this.
Well, let's say in this wonderful world, we've actually nailed our ICP and we know who they are. How would you then go about creating the content and insights that don't just resonate, but they also stand out in a very, very noisy world? And are there any particular frameworks that you can use to help you do this? Zach, just continuing on with you, any recommendations here?
Yeah, so not taking any credit for the great work of many thinkers over the years, but at CEB, we studied actually when we determined like customer loyalty is actually driven by bringing this insight into the customer buying process. And that led to things like the Challenger model coming out of that. Well, one of the things we actually studied was what is the conversation that high performers are having? What is great insight actually doing that is actually guiding customers through that process? The decisions they make through the jobs to be done. And we've actually found that there's a really common formula, if you will, you can use to really the 6 stages of great insight that actually affect the buying decision in the right way. And some have said that this goes back to writing from Aristotle around just human psychology and how do you shape people's perspectives. And actually what we're trying to do here is create demand in most cases, right? So how do you shift the needs and requirements, view the problem? And to be very quick, it's how you make a connection with the customer in the right way to show that you're credible. How do you actually change the way they're looking at that inundation of existing information that they're surrounded by now, and it's like 3x what it was 2 years ago? And then how do you actually have them look at that data and understand the impact that's having in their business and help them understand? So that's really mapping to their world. It's like, oh, wow, this problem is actually probably more serious than I thought, which means I have to be more strategic about how I align my needs and requirements to actually go and solve for this problem. What you're trying to do is inspire your customer to be innovative and work in strategic ways so they can work with you in a high quality partnership, right? Not just this low quality business that's going to be shortcuts. And then what you do is lead them to appreciate the differentiation of why you built the best platform or the best product on earth. But the most important thing about that is probably just acknowledging that, hey, most salespeople go from step 1 to step 6, right? Hey, is this a problem? Yes, it is. I've got the solution, right? And you miss the whole opportunity to actually take the customer there and help them drive the change. And then the second piece of it is that you end by talking about yourself. And I think a lot of people these days, they think insight is, well, the product team just rolled out this great new product. They just inundated us with information how great it is. We're going to go now teach the customers about how great it is and why, and talk about ROI, right? That is actually the opposite of what you need to be doing in most cases when you're thinking about insights, which is centered in the customer and not in, how much you'd like them to love what you've got to offer.
And Zach, what you're really saying here as well is that you've got to have that connection and that credibility early stage as well to even get to the next part. So we can't rush this. Flo, you were mentioning the value of conversational intelligence and Gong earlier. Does that play a big part in this?
Absolutely. And I promise I'm not sponsored by Gong, but I have to say it's my favorite piece of the sales and marketing stack. Because it does, as a marketer, you can't constantly, or you used to have to do this maybe 5-10 years ago, you used to have to hijack sales calls, right? And they've already got like a solutions engineer there themselves, maybe somebody else in partnerships, who knows? And so you had to make this effort to actually attend calls live, but now you can listen to them at 2 times speed and whip through and ask anything of a call with that functionality. And you can very quickly get customer insights that can feed some of the best content. Like some of my kind of penny drop moments where I think of, wow, we should definitely write a blog post about this, or we should prepare a white paper about this, whatever it might, a webinar, normally come from those moments with customers. And I think spending time with your solutions engineers, your CSMs, AEs, hearing what they've got to say, or seeing what nuggets they get from customers. I think if you can promote a culture of sharing snippets within your organization of like, hey, they were talking about this new piece of regulation, which is super key to them as a player in the utilities industry or whatever it might be, that's where you can get your inspiration from. So I think very important to listen to all the customer calls and find those advocates and champions around the business that help feed marketing with ideas is so important. I think another trend I'm seeing on this, and it's quite difficult, is if you're a marketing leader, you need to try and hire somebody with that customer insight into the marketing team. So for example, when I was at Carto, we hired somebody who was a super experienced geospatial engineer into marketing. She was actually somebody who had become a bit of an influencer, B2B influencer around cartography and mapping technologies and stuff. And we managed to get her to come in-house. And so suddenly we had this level of expertise in marketing that we didn't have before. But it's really difficult because lots of people don't want to leave their technical career path in a certain vertical to do a marketing role. So you kind of have to sell it the right way. And I don't know how sustainable it is. And that can be tricky in lots of categories. But for us, you just, the way her content performed versus others' content was just staggeringly different.
Because she knows the space so well, and it's bringing that level of credibility too. Mark, any particular frameworks that you swear by, having, particularly as you've come from a marketing background and moved into the sales space?
Yeah, so there's 2 frameworks actually. So one framework that I've loved for a long time since I worked in the insight space is this concept of jobs to be done. So it's popularized by a Harvard Business School professor called Clayton Christensen. I'd highly recommend I'll share a resource around where he explains just how valuable it is. It's like a 5-minute YouTube video. And the whole concept is why does our buyer hire us? What is the job that they're hiring us to do? Not how we do it. Is it, what's the end benefit? And clearly there's more to it. But actually, if you really understand that deeply, going back to the insight, then it almost doesn't matter about the commonalities of some of the firmographic information. What really cuts through is, I want to hire you to do this specific job, and you are better at doing it than any other viable alternative. So that can become a really powerful framework to generate the insights that go and tell a customer story that drives action. So I'm a big fan of jobs to be done, but it typically lives more in a product perspective. So sometimes it gets borrowed by product marketing, but it's less of a marketing framework. And the big miss, the really big miss that I've come to realize over the last several months is that particularly on marketing teams, they are not familiar enough with sales frameworks like Medit or MedPick, depending on which version you want to use. And the reason that's a big miss is that information and the quality of insight that you get from reviewing MEDDIC as a framework. So for anyone that's not familiar, MEDDIC is a sales qualification framework, and it's used by sales teams to assess the value of a deal, the likelihood of a deal actually progressing and where it is in their deal cycle. So it looks at things like, what is their decision criteria? What metrics do they care about? What pain do they have? What competitor set are they considering relative to our organization? What is their decision process? Like, all of these things can get mapped back into marketing to produce some incredible insights into what is the set of criteria that our actual successful customers go to in order to choose to work with our product. And it rarely gets shared back and produced into a set of marketing collateral that can actually touch the entire buyer journey and produce far powerful insights that will actually drive action and connect the dots between sales and marketing. So for me, that's a huge miss.
And Mark, just staying with you for a second, we've talked here about marketing teams don't really understand a lot of the sales framework like MEDDIC, and I did a little poll in my CMO community. Does everyone know what MEDDIC is? Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what it stands for? No, not a clue. So they all know the word, but not how it's really utilized. And I think one of the challenges here is that you may have individuals within the go-to-market team that really get this, but how do you actually get the whole team buying into it and being consistent? Because there is nothing worse than a customer getting different messaging depending on who they're talking to in that buying journey, which was something that Zach referenced earlier. So how do you enable that team to all be aligned and working together?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough, right? Particularly as you start to scale and you have more and more stakeholders and leaders in position. I think, there's a lot of training and upfront agreement that's needed from an organization. So if it's viewed as a sales qualification framework, which is how most people view it, it's going to be quite hard for marketing or CS to adopt. So I think the first thing is philosophically to agree at a leadership level that this will be our revenue framework. And I think Winning by Design are doing a good job of trying to, they've taken a lot of the core components of MEDDIC and produced their own framework called Spiced. And that aligns to the bow tie, which is, here's a framework that works right across the customer life cycle, from the earliest stages of prospecting and marketing right the way through to customer engagement and activation. So I think number one is agree on a framework that is cross-functional and not seen as just a sales piece. A second area is to then make sure people are taught what's in it. Why is this a win for them? How is this going to help you produce better results, book more meetings, generate more pipeline, and so on and so forth. And then, the third piece is the knottiest one, which is everyone's on different systems, and it's quite hard to pull that thread from a centralized, maybe insight database into, okay, here's the SDR cadence, here's the marketing adverts that are going out, here's the social media posts. Like, that's really, really knotty. And that's where, bit of self-promotion, that's where RevDup is looking to play, to try and make that connection between all the dots far easier by building up this idea of the content infrastructure. So you take your core insights and you make it very easy to distribute them to all the different teams in the relevant context that's important to them. So adoption, you need ease of adoption as well at the end of the day. Oh,
So sorry. So Flo, continuing on with the whole alignment piece coming from the marketing side, how do you make sure that your sales team are really bought into what marketing are putting together as messaging and content, and they're actually utilizing it in the right way?
I mean, firstly, I make a really big point of, whenever it's internal comms with sales, is like, don't tell them what they don't care about. Like, I think so many marketers make the mistake of rocking up to the QBR and going through a ton of acronyms and vanity metrics that nobody in sales cares about. So read your audience and tell them what's relevant to them. Don't waste their time. They're busy and you want to optimize their time with customers and prospecting, etc. I think the other thing is alignment of incentives we haven't really touched on today, which is how do you set variable programs not just for salespeople. We've got the classic approaches to quotas, and well, those are changing a lot as well because lots of people are moving to consumption-based pricing, consumption-based related bonuses and stuff. But if you have a variable scheme that rewards bad behaviors in your marketing team of, manipulating MQL thresholds to make sure they meet an MQL target, then it's not going to work. So I think trying to align everybody on a very similar approach and it being as revenue focused as possible is key. I think we see a lot in your LinkedIn feeds right now from people like Sam Jacobs at Pavilion who talk about one GTM, and there's a lot about all bound, and it's all saying the same thing, which is stop these silos and stop playing in your team and be one team together. And I strongly believe in that, and that has to be super tied to the variable compensation side of things. So that's what I would say.
And Zach, you were talking earlier about having these cross-functional teams where everyone's working together and really adding value to the conversation versus, as you say with Florence, are you actually listening and knowing your audience and what they want to hear? But Zach, have you seen this go wrong in the past? Any lessons you've learned, advice to give people like really don't do this?
Yeah, I think there's kind of these legs of the stool that you need to have in place, and if you don't have one of them, the whole stool collapses, right? And I think that's where we see in most cases you have people focusing on one part of the strategy or one team being engaged in the insight-driven approach, but then you don't have all the support mechanisms in place. So, for example, for a lot of companies we worked with, we would train individuals to be able to work on this insight-driven approach, as Mark mentioned. But then there would be no insights provided to them. So they'd have to come up with it on their own. So then they just became like really pushy salespeople because they're coming up with like, I know the answers, but it's like, that's not what insight selling is about, right? It's a two-way dialogue where you're driving off of something novel around the customer world. And so I think that's an area, obviously, I called our business Insight Revenue because I really wanted to focus on like, how do companies first center themselves as a team around the insight? So having that cross-functional team actually get together in the same room, as I described, working with these frameworks, playing with them, it opens the doors in their minds to like, wow, there's a whole different conversation we should be having. There's all these gaps. We don't really even know what gets our main contacts and buyers like hired and fired, right? Like we don't know what drives their success. And so we got to cover these gaps as a team because we can't do that in silos, right? So that's the starting point. And then we put together, having looked at all these great programs and frameworks that are out there, and Mark mentioned a number of them, and we actually found there's a Frankenstein problem, right? You've got medic in one part of the organization being used. You've got challenger sales or insight sales or selling through curiosity to address another thing. And then you've got maybe other flavors that are brought in by different leaders, but you haven't connected the insight to like true value selling with the customer to an actual process and discipline. And those three pieces we tried to connect in building sort of what's a new modern type of framework. And we call that insight to value, which is literally what it says. Like, how do you teach a team to have insight to what is the perception of value of a buying group? And then we have a customer value roadmap, which is something I've been working on for 15, 16 years, of how do you collaborate with your customers? It's teams selling to teams. Marketing should be involved, especially on high profile accounts. Thinking about how are we guiding this big group of people together to not only get the deal done, but actually believe we're going to be set up to drive the change we want to and achieve success. Which, by the way, if you do that together as a team, then your CSMs and all the teams on implementation are already set up for expansion renewal. And if you don't do that together as a team, what happens if you look at all the data Gartner's putting out about buyer's remorse, right? You finally get that deal done and they regret it the second that you start implementation, and it starts unraveling all over again, right? And so then suddenly, yeah, you have some good numbers on revenue, but then suddenly your churn rate's going up, and with bigger accounts potentially. So that's where I think it's that holistic approach that you bring the teams together, you bring the process together, you bring insight to value, and then you do that together across the whole cycle. I think, Flo and Mark, you made some great points about how it's a team, not just playing together as a team at one stage to the next, but that whole customer experience that they're having with you.
I love this I to the V, insights to the value. So Mark, what tools should we all be using to get the I to the V? Unmute.
Wonderful. That's two in one webinar. Good work. So I think, Flo's already mentioned one. So I think Gong or any other conversational intelligence tool is highly, highly valuable because you want to be listening to the specific language that people are using. I think actually just really getting your CRM implementation right is super important. So a lot of people set up their CRMs, but they don't capture the most important qualification criteria in there consistently. They haven't got proper exit gates set up so that have you got answers to these specific questions in order to move this deal forward, which means it becomes a complete mess. And then, yeah, I don't want to be too self-promotional, but obviously we want to be playing in that space as well to help teams drive, take those insights and make it just far easier to get those cascaded out to all the different teams so that we can start providing value to customers.
So it sounds like you're very much in agreement here. It's not just about the tools, it's about how you use them and how they're integrated as well.
Yeah, like hold accountable the owners of people that tell you you want flashy new tools to actually get the ROI out of it. The amount of times I see that, oh, we've acquired this tool, we acquire that tool, and nobody's really asked the question, okay, but what's been the ROI of this tool? But also, I liked what Mark said about CRM, because so many people don't understand everything that HubSpot can do. And so they acquire new tools like Chili Piper, and it's like, well, really, you could do most of that with HubSpot. Or you acquire something like Lead Feeder, and actually you can get some of the basic functionality with HubSpot. And so there are lots of amazing tools out there, and it depends where you are on your level of sophistication and go to market. My greatest discovery recently has actually been, I mean, everyone uses the contact data enrichment tools like Lusher, Cognism, etc. But I've been super impressed by Apollo's capabilities for CRM enrichment. So that, you know, when Mark said, you know, you need to keep your CRM clean and everything, like, you don't want to put that onus on sellers. Again, like, save sellers time. They've got lots to do. And so with CRM, Apollo's integration, you can just fill gaps passively without ever having to push. And that's a wonderful thing. It's not possible with HubSpot with all of the other contact data enrichment tools. But yeah, Gong is fantastic. But to prove that I'm impartial, I also saw a demo of a tool called Glyphic a couple of weeks ago, which is a new conversational intelligence tool. And I was quite impressed by some of their approaches to the conversational intelligence world. So worth seeing a demo.
And we've just had Clay highlighted here as well. We might come back to that one. So given that we've only got 15 minutes left, I'm going to move us on to our quick fire round. So guys, I'm going to limit you to one sentence or I will cut you off. So let's start with going back to ICP. Mark, how frequently should you revisit your ICP?
Very early stage, every 1 to 2 quarters, because you're learning so much so quickly. Later, it should be at least annual.
Zach?
Agree. Quarterly analyze the trends, annually revisit as a model.
Okay. Flo?
I'm going to say each half and agree with Mark on the stage thing.
Okay, right. Something that I always enjoy is listening to April Dunford talk about personas, where she's very anti this space. So I wanted to know from all of you, do you think it's worth investing in building out personas? Florence?
I think it's worth documenting your ICP in a great amount of detail, whether you need to bucket that into personas. I can see that. And also, like, people might put me into like a CMO style persona, but the reality is I take on a lot of revenue. So maybe personas aren't right because everybody's different and takes on different responsibilities.
That was a good long sentence there, Flo.
Sorry.
Mark?
Who was that? Was that? Am
That
I
was
up?
Mark.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, we've lost Mark. Zach, what's your thoughts on personas?
Yes, keep at them. How you actually make them useful for the teams that are managing territory is what's most important. And so when you look at those roles, and then you look at, I think it's important to look at readiness to actually do, whether it's more progressive things or not, based on how the role is designed, what the company's like. So it's the alignment of those two things. So I think absolutely going to the individual buyer level is really important.
How do you think AI is going to help build awareness and buyer engagement in the next 12 months? Mark?
I think it's going to make it sort of 10 times easier to create tailored content that's valuable and super specific to each prospect at an individual level.
Flo?
I think it's going to save us a ton of time in that process so that we can all watch more MasterChef and go spinning.
Much more efficient. Love that. Focus on the things that we really love, like cooking. Zach?
AI is currently destroying buyer engagement and the ability to break through because nobody listens anymore because of all the garbage that's being churned out at people. But AI will also solve this problem, as Mark knows, and others. And so I hope that actually happens in the next 12 months.
Well, just riffing off that, what's one tactic you've seen successful teams use to win attention in crowded markets, Zach?
So I think it's the combination of using your insights, but then also how you're mapping out the network effect these days to actually be using communities and networks to bring those insights to people in a non-commercial way, to be able to get them to the table to have an interesting conversation on a topic versus an interesting conversation where you try to sell them shit.
Oh, I like that.
Pardon my French.
Leveraging your community. Mark, what would be your recommended tactic?
Yeah, I've got a good friend leading a revenue team who's like really pushed the boundaries of being creative and bold, and particularly on the direct mail side of things, which a lot of people still forget is a great way to cut through. And they've had some incredible responses from very high enterprise prospects that way.
Oh, I do love direct mail. Flo?
Yeah, I think don't be the predictable B2B marketer, think more like a B2C marketer at times. I think Paddle are a great example of a company doing that. So don't just do what the playbooks say.
Get creative. Talking about getting creative, should sales reps build a personal brand? Flo?
I don't think they need to. I think for some of them it's highly advantageous, but I think some of the best sales reps out there probably barely do anything on LinkedIn because they're just laser focused on their customer and aligning with ICP.
Nice, so it can be a bit of a distraction. Zach?
Yeah, I think there's nothing more annoying to the buyers of the world to see folks who really aren't at the level of experience that around an issue, trying to use the tools at their disposal with overconfidence to get attention and to get likes or impressions. And so I think, yes, it should be to drive education and to be more of a personal trainer approach in the market and to elevate yourself that way, but no, not just to become a personality per se.
Right, yeah. Mark, would you agree with that?
I actually think that there's a lot of value to building a personal brand and credibility, but it's often done very badly. And it's really just a thin way of trying to sell the product again, rather than driving value. The second thing is, particularly in sales and marketing, most people are building a personal brand that's more aligned to how do I get my next role versus how do I actually connect with our buyers here. So it's a different type of personal brand that they're trying to build.
So focus on creating value versus I want to hit my target or I want to get my next job. Okay, last question for you all. What's one piece of advice you would give to really upskill in this space? Flo?
Do spend some time doing networking. I know networking sounds cringe to some people, but I feel like some of my best ideas and thought time comes from meeting up with people like you guys at a dinner or a drinks reception or whatever, a breakfast. I just feel like don't get stuck in your company, get out there and listen to other people at other companies.
That is such good advice. It's often when you have the greatest ideas and they're stolen from someone else mentioning something, you're like, yes, that's what I need to be doing. Mark?
I know it's a bit repetitive, but just get very, very customer focused. Listen to calls, go to trade shows, go to events. If you're sick of listening to calls, like get out there, speak to people, but in this case, speak to your potential customers.
Love this. So speak to your network and your peers, but also get out there and speak to your customers at those trade shows and events where you're going to find them. Zach, anything else about getting out there, or are you going to go on a different tangent?
Yeah, no, I love you. Obviously, and people should check out Pavilion if it's relevant. It's a great community and it's a great way to learn. It's kind of the upside down of what CB and Gartner kind of provided to the company and for the individual for development. I think that's an awesome way. Build your network, but I think to connect that to what you want to learn, it's learn about where the customers are going so that you actually can come up with ideas and creativity that's going to beat this AI war, right? Like add that to the AI, have ideas because you know where the industry or where your customers are going to go, and think that way. Think forward. Don't think about just kind of repeating the things you're hearing.
And actually, Zach, Pavilion is where I met all of you guys. I wouldn't have known you without Pavilion. And I remember when I was just getting into the insurtech space, it was an area we were targeting. And I said, how do I go and find their customers? And I was told, go to the pubs in the Square Mile and then just spend a week there and you'll be fine. You'll know everyone. So that was a nice way of integrating myself into the community. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left for any questions. And Joe, I was wondering if you might tell us a little bit about your challenge, because you're in the cyberspace. And as you said, it's very crowded. And how do you really build that credibility? We'd love to hear a little bit from you. Don't know if you're okay to come off mute. Okay, well, Joe, if you can, we'd love to hear from you. And somebody mentioned Clay. Abalade, was that you? Because I'd love to hear your experiences with Clay, because it keeps coming up and I don't know much about it.
Yeah, sorry, apologies. Someone was actually fixing my window, so people were just walking around a lot, so I just came off. But yeah, I think the most important thing about Clay is just because you can tap into all the different data providers at the same time without necessarily needing like individual subscriptions to any of them, because Clay already has those credits with those specific providers. So if you're looking for data on anything really, what they do is they have a very cool credit system where you can just it's like an Excel sheet, but with API. So you can create one column for revenue, one column for emails, phone numbers, etc. And you only need like one input, which is like maybe somebody's LinkedIn or something like that, and it'll just run on automation. And you can gather all those details, and you can plug into like a Lusher and Apollo. You can plug into a bunch of all different ones. I think they have about 150 different data.
Wow, this sounds like worth checking out.
Yeah,
and
it works better that way. Well, I think so anyway.
And while we've got you, what's your ICP?
So I actually work with just CRM and revenue ops leaders, really. We do either day-to-day admin for companies CRM managers who don't have enough time. Essentially, we do a lot of their day-to-day admin work. And then from a revenue aspect, we work with companies on their go-to-market strategy. Clay has been something that helps us stand out, really. Because one thing you can also do is not just the data gathering and enrichment. You can also use to build out that content that Mark was talking about. In terms of the personalization, you can build out and gather a lot of information on individuals, and then within the same platform, you can use AI to pick those points of each individual person and build out content that you want to send out to them. So whether you're looking at their LinkedIn profile, their LinkedIn posts, whether you can use AI to kind of like scrape their websites and get information on that specific person or what their company is up to, and then use that to build into your outreach. And you can do all that on automation.
And in terms of like the amazing insights and content that you've, I'm sure, been created for your ICP, which seems very focused, is there anything you found that's really resonated with them? What have you, like, if you were going to give advice to anyone else in this space, what would you suggest?
We usually talk about the work that we put into to get them, or the work we put into actually figure out that they were the right person to contact. It helps them understand why you think they're relevant, and also helps them understand your work ethic, I think, which resonates with them, because then they sort of think about how you could do that for the people that they're trying to contact.
Yeah, they can see how they'd utilize that in their own space. Really clever. So just to finish up, Zach, thank you so much for putting this report together. And without that, we wouldn't have had this really interesting conversation. Are you planning to run it again next year?
Absolutely.
So I think we should just have a little spread bet here on like what we think the percentage is going to be next year. So starting with you, Zach, 6% this year. What do you think it's going to be next year?
6%, except for our clients.
Great answer.
Flo, what are you thinking?
I'm going to be optimistic and say that it's going to go up.
We're going to get to double figures, do you think?
Maybe, yeah, 10%, something like that.
Mark?
Oh, I'm the most optimistic. I say it's going to go up to at least 12%.
Okay. I'm thinking 9. I don't think we're going to quite make it into double figures, although that makes me really sad. I'd love to say like 25, but I think maybe that's in 10 years' time. So I think we need a placeholder to run this again next year and see how we're doing, and if any of the insights changed as well. See if we've progressed in 12 months.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Zach. Flo, and Mark, really appreciate it. We will, of course, be sending out the recording, and we will send a link to the report as well. It's also in the chat. We'll also send a link out to everyone's LinkedIn. So if you do have specific questions for Mark, Zach, or Flo, they'll be very happy to answer them and connect with you over that as well. So thank you again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at another webinar soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks, Nicola.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.